is Mark Chansky. I'm the coordinator of the Reformed Baptist Network, and I welcome you to another episode of NetTalk. NetTalk is a podcast where we discuss topics related to the Reformed Baptist Network's purpose, and that is glorifying God through fellowship and cooperation and fulfilling the Great Commission to the ends of the earth. And
Amen.
it's our privilege to have with us for this episode Olumide Olumide, and our topic is going to be Christianity in Nigeria. That'll be our particular focus, and we may even get a chance to talk about Christianity in Africa more general. But Olumide, so good to have you with us, brother. Welcome.
Same here too. Thank you so much, brother. I'm so excited about this.
Well, let me give a little background regarding who you are, Olumide. You are a pastor and an elder at Redeemer Baptist Church in Rincon, Georgia, and you've been really at RBC since 2017. You're married
Correct.
to,
Yeah.
boy, if I get name pronunciations incorrect, please clarify. You're married to Madupe, who
Correct.
has a
Yeah.
daughter named Anna, a
Yep.
son named, well, you give me your son's name by way of pronunciation.
Yeah. Ife.
All right, Ife. And
Yeah. That's good.
you were born, Olumide, and raised in Lagos, Nigeria, before immigrating to the U.S. with your family. Olumide
Yes.
serves as an elder at RBC. He's working full time at Diversified as a senior client success manager. He's a graduate of, you name your university for me.
It's called Olabisi Onombajo University. It's a state university in Nigeria.
Very good. And you have a BSc in computer science, and you're the first MA graduate of the Institute of Pastoral and Theological Training, which is a seminary plant of RBC in Nigeria. And Olumide also serves as the president of Lux in Tenebris, a mission organization committed to spreading the gospel in Nigeria by providing support to Reformed churches and outreaches and seminaries and all efforts aimed at sound biblical teaching. And also, I know Olumide best because he is a member of the Reformed Baptist Network Missions Committee. So that's kind of a bio with data, but please, Olumide, give a thumbnail sketch of biography and put some flesh and some muscle on that.
All right. Thank you so much for that opportunity. So I was born into a Muslim home, and as a kid, I went to the Arabic school, learning about Islam, but my mom introduced me to Christianity by talking about the Bible. And so, like I always say, that the mothers have a way of leading you on. They are always that, the Lord has blessed our mothers so much. And so I got to know about Christianity from my mom. And fast forward to my last days in high school, graduating in high school, pondering on the things that I've learned, I've read even in the Bible. Right at that time, I was reading the Bible and I was reading the Quran a bit at that time, and the Lord rested my soul. The very first Sunday of the year 1999, I just decided to walk into a church that I'm familiar with the church, and I went straight to that church and went straight to the front, sat down there, and the pastor was preaching. And I felt like I was the only one in the church, and the pastor was just preaching at me, and the whole darkness just fell off, and that was the beginning of a new life for me, and the Lord has held me strong since then. And I spent most of my time in a Pentecostal and Charismatic church for many years, and in my travels for missions within Nigeria, I met a man, a pastor, an Arabian pastor called Nick Kennicott. And the Lord used Nick so much in my life to bring me to the Reformed faith. And the Lord has been so faithful since then.
So you met Nick there in Nigeria, but then you made an immigration trip and you moved to the USA. Describe the circumstances surrounding that.
All right, so yeah, my father-in-law is a U.S. citizen, and so he had filed for his daughter for almost a long time. Apparently, the way the system works, if you do it the right way, it takes a long time. But if you do it the wrong way, you just go through the border, you come in easily. Unfortunately, that's where we are now. So he took him many years, a U.S. citizen, to bring his own daughter in to the U.S. So when by the time the U.S. government gave all the approval, my wife was we're already married, we had kids, so it was around that time that we were given a immigrant visa to come over to the U.S. And I think the Lord was preparing me for that period. And I think it was God in His sovereignty made it that I was introduced to the Reformed faith in the last few years I spent in Nigeria. So I came to the Reformed faith like almost, it was about almost 5 years to me moving to the US. So it was God who was at work in preparing me for the work in the travel to the United States.
Okay, so you're a very interesting character in your experience, and I want to get to the point eventually about your coming to the USA and your assessing conditions in the USA, even issues having to do with race and critical race theory issues and treatment of African Americans in the USA and your perspective on that. But maybe we'll have time to circle back to that eventually. But describe now in your rearview mirror what's going on there in Nigeria, just a little bit addressing the conditions there culturally and economically and politically and religiously and spiritually. My understanding is that there are key issues facing Nigerians. Just to give a little bit of a background, apparently nearly all Nigerians would see the government there as corrupt. This is what I've read from an assessment, and that there's a
Correct.
widespread inability to afford basics as the cash crisis deepens, and there are really conditions there that make people feel quite unsafe. Just give me a few strokes in sketching a picture of what it's like there in Nigeria.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. I want to give a bit of context so that people can understand Nigeria as well. So, Nigeria is the most populous Black nation in the world. So, you're looking at a country with a population of over 230 million people. And but
And
in
just
size
for
and landmass,
perspective, Olumide, just for
yeah.
perspective,
Mhm.
230 million people in Nigeria, whereas there are approximately 320 million in the USA. And it's my understanding that Nigeria can fit inside, geographically anyway, the state of
Mhm.
Texas. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. State of Texas and just a few miles more. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, so you
It's
can see how that congested.
a very dense population.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's so dense that you walk in the street of Lagos, which is you see people almost everywhere. So yeah, it's so condensed. And now another thing to bring into perspective again for Nigeria is this: 60% of Nigeria's population is between the age 13 and 40. So you're looking at a young a population, a country that has a population of young people. And so it's also tells you how Nigeria is strategic in the whole of Africa. And yet, with all of that, with all of the resources, by the way, Nigeria is also part of OPEC, as part of the oil producing countries. And yet, Nigeria is still battling seriously with poverty as one of the poorest nations in the world. And so Nigeria's case is a case of someone sitting on gold and yet still complaining of not having bread. And so that is the case of Nigeria. And yeah, you're right about corruption in Nigeria, not only in Nigeria, all of Africa, leaders being corrupt. On the one side, the political structure is a problem. on the other side, in some areas, they are battling with uh, civil unrest. But in Nigeria, mostly in the northern part of Nigeria, the northeastern part of Nigeria, we have issues with bandits and issues with Islamic jihadists going on there. That some of these people are battling with, and they are being displaced in that region. But generally, the country itself is battling with corrupt political leaders.
So we hear about the kinds of scourgings taking place in the Northeast through Boko Haram. Tell us a little bit
Correct.
about Boko Haram.
Yeah, Boko Haram was not a thing in Nigeria. I mean, in if you're looking at in the year 15 years ago, so it wasn't a thing in Nigeria. But one of the things, the only thing that we can link it into was after the depose of Gaddafi in Libya and in northern Nigeria and not northern Africa, uh, we started seeing an influx of some of these terrorists in that region going to neighboring regions, and so Nigeria sharing border with Chad Republic and all of that. It was an easy path for most of them to come in. Now, on the other end, some of these people were political thugs that were working for um, uh, governors and leaders who are pushing the Islamic agenda. So it was an easy way for them to use these people to push their agenda. And the agenda was more of doing away with any form of Western civilization in the northeastern Nigeria. And they regard Christianity as a white man's religion. So so yeah, and so that's why the attack is on Christians in those regions because, as far as they're concerned, it's a Western civilization that was brought into Nigeria.
Illumine, we think of Zambia. Many of us are familiar through Conrad Mbeba, who's a part of the Reformed Baptist Network. So we think of Zambia, which is a nation that was uh, really commandeered, one might say colonized by the British. And so there's the British and
Yep.
the English impact. What about Nigeria? What is the history regarding any kind of colonization that's taken place?
Yeah, Nigeria also was a British colony. Yeah, Nigeria was colonized by Britain, and Nigeria had gained our independence from Britain in 1960. Nigeria became a republic in 1960, 3 years after that, and the British had we had the Nigeria was divided into like Western region, Northern region. Were governed by different leaders then before the both region merged together to become Nigeria. And so, like the same way you see Zambia being looking more like what people call a Christian nation.
Well, Zambia would
Nig-
call themselves a Christian nation. What would Nigeria
exactly.
say?
Now, the difference with Zambia and Nigeria is this: one, the complexity with Nigeria's situation is this. One, Nigeria has over 250 ethnic groups. That's a lot
Yes, yes.
of people under in the government. And in the northern part of Nigeria, the northern part of Nigeria is predominantly Muslim because the Islamic jihadists conquered that in the late 13th and 14th century. They were conquered by Islam there. So even with the British rule, the religions were not dealt with. It was just a political uh, government governing how things were going day to day in Nigeria. So that's why it is complex. You can say Nigeria. So that's why Nigeria is regarded as a secular nation, not Nigeria. You can't say Nigeria is a Christian nation. Neither can you say Nigeria is a Muslim nation, though the Muslim population account for like 51% of Nigeria.
So there seems to be somewhat of a common grace tradition there. I think of LGBTQ plus elements and how there is a real resistance to the intrusion of American leftism, which, by the way, my understanding is there are attempts to force it down the throat of not only Nigerians but Africans in general.
Yeah, and that's a situation, and I think the resistance mostly is not coming from a religious perspective, but from a cultural perspective. Because Africa, being a culture, so they hold their culture so much that they've been pushing back based on that. And I've had this conversation recently with people, and I said that what the Western world is doing with LGBTQ is the same thing that the slave masters did. You're trying to indoctrinate these people. So it's a modern day slavery. And that's my take on it. It's a modern day slavery. You're telling them that their culture is not good at all. If we want to do trade with you, you have to do it our own way. This is our culture. You have to accept this culture.
Well, this sounds like a bullying colonization, philosophically anyway, upon the Africans, upon the Nigerians in particular, by our own Biden administration.
Oh yeah, and it's so strong, and right now they're so bullish about it. Allow them put it that way, in the sense that they're holding down trade, bilateral trade within all these African countries, and using that as a leverage and push their own agenda.
Yes, yes, and even LGBTQ and abortion issues and marriage issues, these are all being presented by the left as being virtue and being morality, and that Nigeria should bend the knee to these superior forms of ethics, right? When in reality, it's a real degeneration into a godlessness.
Yeah, a lot of people cannot even wrap their minds around it, knowing the fact that wait a minute, this same uh, countries that are pushing this were countries that brought the gospel to Africa. So,
Yes.
so that's something that people are trying to wrestle with now. The same countries, they led and brought the gospel to Africa. They started institutions that help people to that taught people and raise pastors. Now, these same countries are asking us, that told us those things were wrong, that told our forefathers those things were wrong, and now these same countries are now telling us that this is the right way to go.
Yes, and you think of how the statement all boats rise at the tide of Christian truth and morality, and it is true.
Yeah,
The eighth commandment, "Thou shalt not steal." Even Ephesians 4 speaks of let him who steals steal no more, but rather let him work with his
yeah,
hands, that he might have to give. Work, labor, the Christian ethic of hard work will bring about human flourishing. It will bring about prosperity. It will bring about the accumulation of goods. And that is, again, ethic by which there will be prosperity. Same is true for uh, the sanctity of life. You shall not murder.
amen.
And the sanctity of sexuality. You shall not commit adultery. And the sanctity of truth. You shall not bear false witness. All these principles will build a society that will result in human flourishing and the glory of God.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Mark. That's those are the and those were the teachings that did establish a lot of things in Africa. Just to back just a brief of history about Christianity in Nigeria and Africa. Now today, a lot of people do not talk. They talk about slavery, and they talk about all of this from a window, a perspective that fits the narrative of the liberal left, but they forget something. I'll give you an example. The missionaries were the one that laid the foundation for the modern day Africa, not the slave masters. And I can argue this over and over again. What did the missionaries do? They developed our languages for us. They were the one that wrote alphabets for these most African languages. They developed dictionaries, and they now started doing translations for in Africa to lay the foundation for modern African education. Now, why were why did people point accusing fingers at the missionaries? They said the missionaries were bedfellows with the slave masters. Now, the truth about this is this: there's no way these missionaries can come to Africa without boarding this ship, without boarding this this platform that brought them to Africa. They used that platform, but they were not bedfellows with them. They used the platform, but what the goal for them was to go and bring the gospel there. And they didn't only bring the gospel, they helped Africa develop most of our languages. I'll give you an example. The Yoruba language, the Yoruba tribe is a major tribe in Nigeria, and they have over 40 million people speaking the Yoruba language. 40 million people. Now, the Yoruba language was developed by a young Yoruba boy who was taken as a slave. His name is Bishop Ajayi Crowther. His name is Ajayi Crowther, Samuel Ajayi Crowther. He's the first African bishop of the Church of England. He was taken as a slave at 12 years old, and as it was going, as they were going, the the slave ship they were attacked by abolitionists, and they rescued him. And in Freetown, he heard the gospel and he came to faith.
Yes.
And he was sent to school in England, trained, and he came back to his hometown, and he dedicated all his life not only writing the first dictionary in Yoruba language, developing the alphabet of Yoruba alphabet from the Latin alphabet, but he also translated the Bible in 1880, the whole Bible to Yoruba language, worked on Igbo language, worked on other languages, and developed all these languages as a missionary. These are stories that are not told today about how the missionaries worked in that. Not only that, even in the southeastern part of Nigeria, the Scottish Presbyterian Mission came and developed that language, wrote everything, and also helped work a lot of things there. The first printing press in Nigeria, guess what it printed? The Westminster Confession of Faith.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is a story that's not told today.
So your Reformed Christianity, of course, being developed, the seeds being planted there in Nigeria. I think of how righteousness exalts a nation, but
Amen.
sin is a disgrace to any people. And I believe that much of that grace and that blessing and the infrastructure for human prosperity is now being dismantled by, like you say, another form of colonization taking place, where I think we have the Biden administration force feeding leftist progressivism onto African nations in general. Again, forcing homosexuality and lesbianism and transgenderism and abortion and feminism and egalitarianism, even euthanasia, really bribing them into a culture defying anti-traditionalism that is really, we do this even by threatening to withhold American financial aid. But let me spin from this too. You're in the USA now. And I remember about a year ago, I was in LaGuardia Airport. I was on a bus going from one terminal to another, and I was standing next to this really tall, muscular, dark-skinned man, and I asked him, where is he from? He said he's a Nigerian. He had this big, intimidating smile and this deep voice. And I said, it's interesting. You say you're Nigerian. I shared that I'd read recently that the average Nigerian who's in America enjoys a higher annual wage than the average Native American, even white person. And I asked him, I said, now why is this? And he laughed with a deep laugh.
Like I'm laughing now.
because he realizes that so many in the USA embrace critical race theory that would claim that the color of one's skin makes them a victim and that they're unfairly abused and therefore they're unable to succeed because of the color of their skin. But here, Nigerians, they come and it seems like they have at least somewhat of a built-in work ethic or at least enough common grace to realize, wow, you come to America, you work hard. There's the proverb that says, do you see a man skilled in his work? He'll not serve before obscure men. He'll serve before kings. He just said, if you work hard in America, you can become very prosperous. Now respond to me on that. That's what Nigerians seem to recognize, and they are very successful.
Oh yes, and one of the things that I experienced something similar like that, and it just 1 month after I came to the United States, someone asked me, "What do you think about the United States?" And I said, "What worries me is I don't I wonder why I hear people that look like me, African Americans, complain that there's no job." And he looked at me and was like, "Why do you say that?" I was like, "I'm working," and he said, "Are you sure?" I was like, "Yeah." I worked as an installer when I came to the US. And I remember when a deacon of our church introduced me to the contractor, and I went to him and I gave him my resume. And he looked at me and said, "You're overqualified for this job. This job, we just need a high school diploma." And I told him, "I want to work." I said, "I have two obligations. One, God has commanded me to work. So I'm doing this in response, in obedience to God. And two, I have a responsibility for my family. So if it's just $11 an hour, I will start from there. I will work." That is the sense that Nigerians bring to the United States. They want to work. We have this dignity of labor. We want to work. We have this thing. And that's what I told the guy. And I said, I don't know why people say there's no job. Let's look at this also in what we see today about the whole CRT issue. Mark, I'm not old enough, but in the
How
Reconstruction
old are you,
era,
Olumide? Help us.
I'm 40, I'm 43.
You're a good-looking 43, Olumide.
Yeah. Yeah. So uh in this in during the Reconstruction era, I've read and we see that is when African Americans were not given bread, this guy said, "We will plant wheat, make our own flour, and make our own bread." Now, under oppression, they started institutions. Under oppression, they built businesses. Under oppression, they built schools and all of these things. The like of Booker T. Washington, they built institutions and schools even when they were oppressed. And I believe that that was God at work shaming the ungodly leaders who were putting them under oppression. God was taking the foolish things to shame the wise.
Yes.
Now, fast forward to this current generation who are not under the oppression their forefathers were. Now they're complaining that they're not getting bread and that they have the right to have bread. Why their forefathers looked at the oppressor and said, "You won't give us bread? We will make bread our own." And they did it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so we see what CRT has done is that we see a generation, and I can say this, we can look at it, is this. We see the liberal left continuing the same circle of oppression, but in a different way. In a way that, hey, you deserve bread, get it from the government, they should give you bread. Meanwhile, their forefathers said, no, there's a dignity in working. We will build institutions ourselves. And so that's what you see right now with what the CRT is doing.
Well, yes, and you and that other Nigerian at LaGuardia Airport, you haven't bought the lie which says you're a victim and you can't, but rather you are a man made in the image of God and you were put in the garden to cultivate it and to keep it. And if even by the sweat of your brow amidst thorns and thistles you work it, you
Yeah,
will enjoy a harvest and there'll be even prosperity. Because, again, there's this presentation now of it's victimology for people who are minorities or dark skin, and the idea of a meritocracy, somehow that is an evil system. And I think that you have displayed by your own life and other Nigerians to say, look, you come to America, it doesn't make a difference if you have dark skin. If you work hard, you will, generally speaking, prosper. Again, you see a man skilled with his hands, he won't serve before obscure men, he'll serve before kings. That's a striking thing. But let's now
man.
turn another corner. Okay, you talked
Hmm.
about Nick Kennicott and the Institute of Pastoral and Theological Training there in Nigeria. Nick is a RBNet pastor, labors alongside Pastor Jeff Smith, at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Coconut Creek, Florida. Uh, Nick has labored for really over a decade
Yeah.
there. I know really 2012, I think, was his first trip to Nigeria. He had pastors' conferences there. In 2014, 15, 16, he really set up this institute. Even the Reformed Baptist Seminary lectures were presented early on. He used Amazon Kindle tablets.
Yeah.
He purchased a plot of land. There was a building project. Now, recently, Nick has made, I think, his 20th trip this year to Nigeria. I think there are 80 students in the pipeline of IPTT. I think there are 11 graduates. I know they have an academic building, a guest house, a couple of acres of land now, 8 faculty and staff. I think 60 students the last time were gathered together for classes. Tell me a little bit about how IPTT, the Institute of Pastoral and Theological Training, has developed and the condition and any updates.
All right, thank you so much for that. So I'm a product of IPTT today, and when Nick came to Nigeria in 2022, 2012, they had a pastors conference. I attended that conference, and it was different for me, and it was at the same time an answer to prayers, because at that time I was in the charismatic movement and I was asking questions about some of the things that they were doing, and no one could answer that. So in this conference I saw how Nick uh, exposed the scriptures and all of that. I was like, yeah, this is like exactly what I've been asking. And so I met with Nick, and Nick told me, say, hey, you have a good heart. Hold on to it. Fast forward a year later, was I
Well,
was
you were
told that they
coming
start
out of kind of a charismatic type background, right?
exactly, yeah. And a year later, I was told that is this seminar is about to start, and I applied for it. And I walked into the interview room. There was Nick about to interview me, and we talked about that, and the whole process started on. And that was when I was introduced to Reformed theology, and we were 12 that started then. And it was a good exercise. It was a great one. It was challenging. It challenged us to the core of our faith. And even right there, that was when I would say I broke down totally, because at a point for me it was like punches on all sides. I was being punched down to the core of my faith. I was shaking down that do I really believe what I believe? And the height of it was when part of the resources that we had in there was Sam Waldron's exposition of 1689.
Yeah.
And that was it for me. I read that book, and that was it for me. That was the beginning of my journey, and I said yes to the Reformed faith, and I embrace it. And the school has been so wonderful in helping to train pastors. We've had a lot of people come through the school. Some didn't get to finish, but they've taken something along. I know some of them, they are still struggling in their churches, but they've taken something along that has shaping how they approach the scripture, and also how they pastor in their pastoral ministry. And but the Lord used that for me and for my family, especially for the work I was doing. At that time, I was teaching. I had a church that we started, and I closed down the church. Fortunately, I said, no, this church was planted unbiblically,
Uh,
and we're going to go back to being we're going to go to being a Bible study and have teach the Bible. And we taught the scripture, and we continue. And it was so wonderful that most of the things I was learning for the seminary, I was teaching it to my family, and I was teaching it to the Bible study group. And the glory of God, 90% of everyone in that Bible study group today are Reformed Baptists.
so the church reconstituted then with
No,
a
the church did not
denomination.
reconstitute. Everybody went across to different location, but all of them now are members of a Reformed Baptist church.
All right, all right. So talk to me about now Christianity in Nigeria. You say Reformed Baptist Church in Nigeria. Well, what kind of denominations are there in Nigeria?
Okay. We have predominantly in Nigeria, the denomination of churches are mainly charismatic and Pentecostal churches. We'd also have what in Nigeria we call them mainly the Orthodox churches. The Orthodox churches in Nigeria are referred to the Catholic and the Anglican. Uh, just because people don't know the meaning of what the word Orthodox mean, orthodoxy, and so they refer to the older churches as Orthodox churches, and the charismatic churches actually make most of the churches are charismatic and Pentecostal churches. And when we say charismatic, we're referring to um, health and wealth prosperity gospel churches. That's what we refer to them as charismatic, as an umbrella name.
So the word of faith heresy really has spread throughout Nigeria.
It is solid. So in the last 50 years, Nigeria became the hub of the Word of Faith movement in Africa. So much that Nigeria was raising men and we're sending them all across Africa to take the Word of Faith movement. The likes of Kenneth Hagin, they devoted a lot to Nigeria, a lot of time raising men who will spread the Word of Faith movement all across Africa. So Nigeria it's the hub, the home of the Word of Faith movement in Africa.
Okay, so how does this connect, this word of faith movement and the prosperity gospel? How does this work when it's my understanding that the majority of the Nigerian population lives on maybe less than $1 a day? And even Nick Kennicott was telling about these seminarians who would come to IPTT, and I
Mhm.
think it was lunch costs 50 cents, but maybe some of the guys could pay for the first day, but their pockets were empty by the second day. How does this kind of poverty match up with the word of faith heresy? And aren't the lights going on in the minds of many in Nigeria regarding the falsehood of what's being taught?
So, so culturally, Africa is we're superstitious a lot. They believe in something. If something is wrong, definitely there is a deity or something, a god that is attached to it, that's affecting all of that. And that is something that the Word of Faith movement fits in well for them, in the sense that if you're poor, maybe there is a god in your family that is affecting you, that's actually attacking you from being not being not being rich. So the Word of Faith movement teaches that, oh, if you put your faith by sowing a seed. Now, for Africans and mainly Nigerian culture, is on if you have not made a sacrifice, then you have not actually take any step towards changing your life. So seed sowing for them, they can relate to it from their traditional religion. Oh yeah, I need to I need to kill a ram, or I need to uh, do something before I can be prosperous. So the word of faith movement fits into that. So rather than them investing in labor, they will rather take that money as a shortcut to go invest in the pastor who says, you sow the seed and the Lord will multiply it for you. And so that has kept a lot of people in poverty because they believe that they're waiting for God to answer their prayers to become rich.
You talk about syncretism. Really, this is the
Yeah.
bringing in of false deities into a system of belief, and then the superstition. I know Conrad Mbewe calls many Nigerian pastors witch doctors.
Witch doctors. Yeah. I know. Yeah.
Tell me the validity of that accusation.
He's 100% right. I mean, if you sit down and listen and watch an average Nigerian pastor, I can and look at a witch doctor, there's no difference. There's no difference at all. He's not preaching the gospel. he's calling you to come do something. As far as some of them are telling you, oh, the reason why you're not prosperous is because someone somewhere has gone to a witch doctor to make sure your life, your destiny is tied down to somewhere. So you need to do something about that to change, to reverse that. That's all they're doing. So they go into the Old Testament, pick up scriptures out of context, and use that in line of with their African traditional religion, and said, this is what the Bible is teaching. You need to do this. So Pastor Conrad and Bill is 100% correct. They are witch doctors.
Yes, yes. So now tell me, why does Nigeria have such a significant influence on the rest of Africa? Is the wealth of oil a significant influencer, or what more so regarding? See, we think of Europe, and we think of Germany being very influential in Europe, and there are elements regarding the productivity of Germany that may have created that kind of
Inventions, yeah.
a gravitas in Europe. What about Nigeria? Why does Nigeria have a lot of gravitas in Africa, on their continent?
Yeah, one of the reasons is because one, of course, the population of Nigeria speaks volume because of that large population. There's no
230
country.
million.
Yeah, and that gives that's a population that attracts investors. And so, and also we see that Nigeria is leading in a lot of industry. There we have captains of industry, and Nigerians do well outside of Nigeria, and so they'll have lots of Nigeria outside of Nigeria that's doing fantastic well, leading Africa. Actually, there are more Nigerians um, we have more Nigerians outside of Africa than any other African country that are leading in a lot of industries. And so that makes Nigeria more of a leading country in Africa. And also Nigeria, because of the population, there's a lot of emerging markets and things like that draws people to Nigeria. And the oil too is a major thing. During the Gulf War, Nigeria made a lot of money in uh, selling oil and working with the Western world to sell oil. So that brought Nigeria into the forefront of in Africa.
Okay, this does seem a little counterintuitive that if Nigerians have a very productive work ethic, why so much poverty? Is it because of governmental corruption?
Yeah, and yeah, it's counterintuitive. You're right because Nigerians will go out and they'll do exceedingly well, but in the country they're complaining and things are not going well. And yeah, it's mainly because of the leaders, but also it's also because of there's a lot of cultural influence there in the sense that there is the influence of um, because someone is my leader, then I expect that that person should do everything and create the environment for me to be successful. And so, and that dependence on the government is so much that if the government is not doing it, and then things will not work out for us. Now, we have seen people who have stepped out and they've done things well. We have people who, out of nothing, built banks and institutions, and they're doing well. But it's prevalent. It's what we see here is more of the corrupt leadership, and I can argue that also the current system of government for Nigeria is not the right system of government. I will say, why did I say that? Is that the whole African, I mean, I can argue for Nigeria is we have a country that had different empires, and these empires where have a monarchical system that they are used to. Now, suddenly they were colonized and we now brought a new system for them to do their day-to-day life. That system, as up to date, has not been effective for Africa. Now, Am I advocating for us to go back to the kinship state? No, but I'm saying that that is one of the reasons why Africa is not effective in the things they are doing, because this is a system that forefathers never handed over to them,
Mm-hmm.
that they were forced to begin to use. And though we cannot erase the part of human responsibility, we can't erase the part of human that we are as humans, we are responsible for our actions. But at the same time, we have a system that they were not, that was not the foundation of their culture.
Okay, that's helpful. That's helpful. What would you say are the greatest challenges for faithful biblical churches in Nigeria at this time?
Faithful men.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And that's why
and
IPTT is so crucial, isn't it? The idea of
exactly,
training
and
up
yeah,
men for the work of the ministry.
faithful men and also sound biblical resources. And well, like I said, during your introduction, you mentioned lux in tenebris, which is Latin for light in darkness, and that's one of the that's one of the things that we are doing at lux in tenebris, where we are uh, helping to raise those faithful men, train men who will do the same and train other men and plant more churches. And we are also uh, bringing forth resources. So I want you to see LIT as an what you call an aircraft carrier, where we want to be the platform in which sound biblical resources can come into Nigeria. We want to be the platform in which we can bring in men who will help train faithful men in Nigeria so that we can plant more Reformed Baptist churches.
So,
Right now,
is Lux and Tenebris working in symphony with IPTT?
oh yes, yeah, we've helped with even right now we are helping. We provided resources to the library of IPTT. Yeah, we're working in contact, we're helping with them whatever way we can in terms of resources, having resources over there. And when they have conferences, we provide resources, free resources for their conferences. And also we are working with some students there too in the helping to have make sure they have resources whenever they need them. So IPTT is one of the institution in Nigeria that we are also working with.
How can someone give to IPTT and or Lux and Tenebris?
Yeah, for IPTT, you can give through Emmanuel Baptist Church. Emmanuel, you can just go to Emmanuel and give through Emmanuel
That's in
and
Coconut Creek, Florida.
Coconut Creek. Yeah, and Emmanuel will make sure that goes to IPTT. And for Lux in Tenebris, you can go to our website at litreformed.org and you can give to the work there. Or you can also write a check to Lux in Tenebris and mail it to 226 Goshen Road in Rincon, Georgia, where RBC is, Reformed Baptist Church in Redeemer Baptist Church in Rincon.
So Lux and Tenebris, light and darkness.
Yes.
Yes, very good, very good. Well, let me just a little more before we close down here. Uh, Tell me about the interactions between Christians and Muslims in Nigeria.
Yeah. So in the southern part of Nigeria, it is not so much of a tense or conflict, but in the northern part of Nigeria, it is a conflict. It's a great one, and uh,
The Christians being murdered in northern Nigeria.
yeah,
What's
yeah,
going on?
churches been attacked there. Now, some of them are more of a tribal issue that now spiral into that because you see some tribe, they are predominantly Muslim because of the Islamic jihadists conquering that the northern part of Nigeria, and you see some other tribe in the same north who are predominantly Christian, and because of that tribal conflict, it's it moves into religious conflict, and because um, Africa generally we are when it comes to religion we are sentimental a lot, and so that you see that conflict in the northern part of Nigeria, but unlike the south it's not so much as it is, and that's one reason why we believe that there's a need to plant more Reformed Baptist churches, especially in the northern part of Nigeria.
So what would it take, Olumide, to
Mhm.
plant more Reformed Baptist churches there? Specifically,
It
you
takes
say the
it
training of
takes
men. Training
Albinet,
of men is key.
and I think it takes Albinet because Albinet has set the platform. Albinet, I believe the Lord has
RBNet,
established
Reformed Baptist Network. Okay.
network. Yeah, Reformed Baptist Network is, I believe, the Lord has established as a platform to do this work. Why do I say that? The churches that were planted in Africa and even in Nigeria in when the missionaries came were not done by just one organization. We had what we call the CMS, that's the Christ Missionary Society. Christ Missionary Society was Baptist Methodists came together and say, let's do this work together. And they sent missionary under the same umbrella to plant churches. I believe that RBNet, Reformed Baptist Network, is like that for this generation. It's there for such a time like this, where RBNet can work with LIT and begin to send down people who can train men to plant these churches. And it's a solid platform where you have Reformed Baptist churches already part of that are part of the RBNet can also plug into this and ask question, how can we be part of this work? And they can be part of this work by going down there and say, look at what's on ground and see how they can work with us. I have we have visits that we're doing annually that were set with schedule to go there. We train pastors, we do conferences, and we can work with these churches to begin to plant, to see how church planting efforts can be done. Mark, you mentioned 230 million people, less than 10 Reformed Baptist churches in Nigeria.
230 million people, less than 10 Reformed Baptist churches. So the fields are really white unto
It's
harvest there. And again,
yeah,
IPTT, you say we need men. That's the very thing that they are seeking to do, to train faithful men to do the work of the ministry.
yeah.
Okay. What are younger people, younger Christians, uh, turning reformed, or is it older Christians? And how are they finding these reformed truths? Is it by word of mouth? Is it over internet? Is it YouTube? Tell me about that.
Oh yeah, the younger ones are the ones that are turning more reform. They are the younger generations are the ones that are getting exposed to the reform faith through the internet, and a lot of them, I would say, a lot of them have been drawn by the likes of Paul Washer, listening to Paul Washer, listening to John Piper, listening to all these men on the internet through the social media, and so we see a lot of younger ones coming to reform faith. Now, what that has caused now is there's now a vacuum. Now, they're no longer going to their church, but they don't have a church to go to, and they stay online doing church from home, listening to pastors from the United States. And so that's
It's
why there's a
become
need.
toxic. Forsaking the assembling of
Exactly.
ourselves together, as is the habit of some.
Exactly. And so that's why that's why we see that that's why there is a need for us to plant more churches, because we are now having a lot of younger ones who are coming to this reform faith, but now they are on church. They don't have any church to go to.
Yeah, yeah. We think of Conrad Mbewe, who is a RBNet member, or even we think of Vodi Balcom, who preached at our RBNet General Assembly last year in Taylor,
Last
South
year.
Carolina. These are guys from Africa. And no
Yeah.
doubt they have a big hearing and a viewing on the web, on the internet, on YouTube. And so they look, where are churches teaching these things that we're hearing that are resonating with our souls? And we need to plant those churches so that there can be true flocks led by the Good Shepherd, so that we are a spiritual house being built up as living stones to worship the Lord and to
Amen.
train, baptize, teach them to obey all the things He's commanded with the Great Commission.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. And Pastor Conrad has done a very good job in in the African continent in reaching out all across Africa to help raise this man. And we are so blessed to have such a man in this generation.
Yeah, I think of how I was 17 years old when I was saved, and I can't help think of the Nigerian 17-year-old or 27-year-old or 37-year-old who realizes, natively thinking, I thought if I did more goods than bads, the scales of justice would tip in my favor on Judgment Day. But then to realize, no, all my righteous deeds are as filthy rags, and what I need is the work of the Lord Jesus Christ to take the mountain of my sin and bear it into the heart of the sea, to have all of my sins downloaded onto the hard drive of Christ's soul as he hung there on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? The idea of he who knew no sin became sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And we died and said, it is finished. All of my sins, past, present, and future, were paid in full. So now I can stand before God as righteous on the last day, to be all clean, like a little child coming out of the bathtub, wrapped up in the towel, the beefy towel, how cute and how wonderfully beautiful that child looks. That's the way I now look in the eyes of my Heavenly Father, wrapped up in the beefy white righteousness of the Lord Jesus Christ. Oh, would that gospel go to Nigerians from north, south, and east to west, and may they believe on the Lord Jesus that they might be saved. Well, that's kind of a finale.
Amen. What you just beautifully captured now.
Illuminate the last word that you would bring before we close up here.
Okay, let me just say what you just beautifully captured right now about the gospel that took a wicked, wretched person like me, and the Lord washed me clean, and I do not deserve anything, and He brought me. Not only did God cancel all the debt and everything, He brought me in and called me a son, and I can now come before the Lord God and will not be consumed by fire, will not be consumed by His wrath. That gospel you just captured now is not what is heard on the pulpit in most churches in Nigeria. And that's why we need to raise men who will preach this true gospel. Amen. And proclaim it unashamed, unafraid. I want to close with two things as we wrap up. Is this: 2 years ago when I was in Nigeria, I was teaching a group of some pastors, and I asked them to write down what the gospel is, and some captured it well, but most of them could not even articulate the gospel. And after the class, I was talking to one of them, and he was almost in tears that he thought that all he has been teaching for the last 20 years was the gospel, but he hasn't been teaching the gospel. And so it's just amazing when you come there and look at and they see the truth of the gospel. A lot of them are like, wow, this is what the Bible teaches, and I've been carrying this Bible for decades and I do not know.
I really appreciate the time you've taken, and may it be that the Lord would bless Lux and Tenebris and IPTT, and may the Lord bless the nation of Nigeria, your homeland. Amen. So thanks so much for the time that you've spent with us. Every blessing, brother.
Thank you so much. Every blessing to you, brother. Thank you so much. Truly appreciate it.